Hi guys and welcome back. Today I am starting an oil painting and I'm trying things a little bit differently as far as how I show you the process of them, or at least for this one. I'm going to try it out. I love being able to spend time on my oil paintings. They take significantly longer than a watercolor and I really enjoy that. I love that I can really get focused on the refinement and the details. But again, it takes a lot more time, so I find that the way that I schedule, the way that I actually work on paintings doesn't really work as well with oils, because when I'm working on watercolors, I can get a watercolor done every single week and that's reliable, but with the oil painting, it takes a lot longer and I don't always know exactly when it's going to be able to be done. So yeah, I'm gonna try breaking it down into a little bit more of a natural kind of approach to showing you how I'm working on it. So I'm going to show you guys a piece of this oil painting from where I got done at about the time that I needed to start editing this video. So but yeah, that's my plan. I also have the sketch all ready and everything, so that's what I worked on at the beginning of this week, and then I was able to work on this painting. So yeah, let's just go ahead and jump in. But I figured I'd show you the sketch really quick. I'll probably just post it up like up here. But I was really struggling with coming up with an idea the last couple of weeks. I just could not make anything happen. I was just feeling completely out of ideas and really frustrated at myself for that. So when I finally just felt this desire to paint again, it was so exciting, and I immediately had this idea of a portrait of a woman standing in front of this really dramatic sunset. And then as I continued developing out the idea, as I was sketching it out, I decided that I wanted to push it even further and have this little bit more of a surreal kind of element with this wolf head. And I want it to be like this extension of the emotion that she has inside of her. And I want this really intense, saturated sunset behind her. And I want those to demonstrate a little bit more of this like hidden emotion or hidden feelings that someone can have. Yeah, so that was basically the idea behind it. I had a lot of fun working through the sketch and then working through the color comp, so I'm really excited to get to work on actually putting some oil to this. And now it's time to do the gesso on top of the board. I printed off the sketch that I had, and since I'm all out of transfer paper, I just scribble on the back of it. I actually use a light box, that way I can just put it exactly where sort of where the lines are going to be, and then I transfer it over and then I redefine the lines a little bit better. But yes, now it's time to add clear gesso. I use this because I like to be able to work off of the color of the wood itself, and also I like to have the sketch obviously show through. I put it there for a reason, but yeah, that's the next step. And I'm just jumping right in with the background. I absolutely loved painting this. It was so much fun, probably because of how saturated and bright it ended up being. That's just something that I absolutely love about oils. When I work on doing color comps digitally, I always have to make sure, of course, that I bring down the saturation, because I tend to really like the bright colors, so I make them too bright and then I have to bring them down a couple of notches. But with oils, they get a lot more saturated than watercolors do, which is really a very fun thing to have a lot wider of an option when it comes to painting with oils. And yeah, it was really happy to me to see how saturated and bright and clean and crisp this red color ended up being. The biggest thing I think that went in my advantage this time around, at least, is that I actually did some tests before I started painting the actual painting, which this seems obvious now that I should be doing this anyways, but mixing paints with oils is still something very new to me, so I have not figured out what paints go well together, because some paints, when you mix them together, even if they're in the exact same color family, they end up super muddy, and other paints, you mix them together and they end up really clean and bright and saturated. So that was what I had to do. I took all of my reds, which I somehow ended up with like way more red paints than any other color family of paints. But anyways, I took all of those and then I mixed them with the purples and the blues that I had available to add that variety into the background, the setting sun background. And yeah, the red that I found to be the most bright and mixed the best with the purple that I wanted to use was quinacridone red. No surprise there. It's one of my all-time favorite watercolor paints, so it's really fun to be able to see that also carries over into oil painting. So that was the key paint that I used for the areas that I wanted it to be the brightest. And then the other two paints that I used was quinacridone violet and dioxazine purple. I also used white, of course, to brighten things up. I use the white sparingly because white does have a way of desaturating paints, so I did want it to still be very saturated and bright, and that was the thing that I wanted to be the priority as far as painting the background. Okay, so today I'm going to work on the face. I got the background painted yesterday, at least the first pass. All of this is just going to be the first layer. I am excited about doing all the layers on top of it because that's when it really just starts coming alive. But yeah, I wanted to paint the background first because it's so saturated. It's actually probably the most saturated element in this painting. So being able to get that done first, it allows me to make sure that the face is being correctly adjusted so that the saturation fits with it the way that I want it to, and I make sure that the value is also there. Yeah, and in the past when I have done elements like this later after doing the face, I found that the face oftentimes looks much more dull than I intended because in comparison, the background or whatever that element was way more saturated. So I like to do that. It's a lot easier to be able to make sure that everything's adjusted correctly. But yeah, I'm really nervous. I'm always nervous to paint the skin in oils because it's such a new process and I have definitely made missteps in the past. But yeah, I have my reference on my iPad back behind my canvas that I'm working on, so I can look at that. And I also have my color comp, so I can adjust the colors a little bit closer to that as I'm working on it. And I'm just gonna get to it. Hopefully this first layer will at least be serviceable for the next layer. And the next layer, I'm going to focus a little bit more on the color variations within the face. And this first layer, I'm going to try to establish most of the values correctly and then get a little bit more playful with the placement of the different colors that you can find in the face. So anyways, let's get to work mixing some colors for the skin. So jumping into mixing up the base colors that I'd be using for the skin, I had my color comp behind me on my iPad, and then I also had the actual reference of the model that I was using to figure out the darks and the lights and how much of everything I would need. And as I was mixing it up, I made sure to pay attention to the fact that it's going to be a much cooler skin tone because I wanted it to feel like she's in the environment that matches that sunset. Like that color and light is reflecting onto her face. So I did end up using, I think it was quinacridone red. Yes, it was definitely quinacridone red in the mixture of the paint. That way it did still tie in with the background. It had those similar colors rather than not having any connection to it. And sometimes I can make certain elements feel really foreign and like they really stand out and don't mesh and harmonize well. So that's a nice little trick for whether you're doing oils or watercolors, is to just use a little bit of a mixture of the same paints in different areas so that everything ties together. But yeah, I did make sure that it was, or at least I tried to make sure it wasn't overly saturated because I wanted it to still feel like a skin tone that was just in a specific lighting environment rather than being super saturated and a little bit alien. And that was one thing that I had to keep bringing it down a bit and adjusting. And I did also have to make sure that it was adjusted cool enough because I kept mixing it significantly warmer and then I think it was right, and then I would hold it up to to the actual painting and compare it to the background, and then I would hold it up to my color comp and realize that it was still much, much warmer. So yeah, I had to lean into that a little bit more and get it mixed up, and then I got the shadows mixed up, and yeah, that was a nice change of pace as far as mixing up the skin tones, because a lot of times I spend a lot more time struggling with figuring it out as far as on the palette, and I think I'm just getting a little bit better at it. So the reference that I'm loosely basing this off of has a very strong rim lighting, and I love that. I love how dramatic the lighting is on it, and it works really perfectly with the environment that I wanted to set up for this character. For a character that's standing by a really bright sunset, it would make sense that there would be this really strong light source from mostly behind the character. I love working with really dramatic light sources like that in my oil painting, and really all of them. I've been learning to embrace that more and more, where I used to tend to just work with very simple, bland light sources because I would be able to just sit down and paint it without reference, but I don't want to do that anymore. I really enjoy the challenge of being able to work through a more dramatic lighting setup like this. But yeah, when I was looking at it, one thing that I love about it, and that I'm trying to pay attention to anyways, obviously, is that right next to the bright rim light is actually some of the darkest shadows on the figure's face. And then it gradually turns into a little bit more of a normal highlight kind of an area, whereas the highlight on the rim light is like really direct bright light, and then as you wrap around the face it ends up being more like a naturally highlit area, if that makes sense. So yeah, I was really trying to break down the areas of lights and darks and trying to simplify them a bit at this step, because that is something that I'm still really new at, as far as having very more complex planes of the face. Man, I can't speak right now, but anyways, I am trying to be much more attentive to different areas like that, especially when I'm looking at the reference and studying it, and especially when I'm picking out reference. This is the key thing for me, is that if I start off with a really great reference, or I take really great reference, then it will be so much easier for me when I'm working on a stage like this, as opposed to, say, working off of a reference for the sketch and then realizing it doesn't have good enough lighting for me to use as my value reference, and then I have to go find something that sort of matches the pose and the facial features but has better lighting, and I have done that, and it's extremely frustrating. But one thing that I have learned since I started oil painting is that at the beginning I had this idea that once you painted something down and it was wet, you couldn't really rework it unless you were blending until it was dry, until you could add more paint on top, which is definitely not the case. And I am excited to finally have worked through that and learned that there is still a lot of manipulation that I can put into areas that are still wet. And yeah, that just means that I end up getting a lot more painting done and refinement in the first stages than I did when I was first painting, because I would put down the first layer, I would kind of blend it together, but then I just couldn't. I thought I couldn't really refine it beyond that, so I'd have to just sit there and wait and wait and wait for it to dry until I could add more paint. But that goes a long way, being able to sit down, and I was just working the different areas a little bit more and adding more paint on top too. That was the thing, that I can add more. There, of course, is a limit to how much paint you can apply to already wet paint to that canvas, but it was more than I thought, because at the beginning I thought I could do any, and or almost any. So yeah, I was able to refine areas and get things a little bit more well-defined and more set up for the next layer that I'm going to do. But I think I want to talk a little bit really quickly on what I'd ideally like to do with some of my videos moving forward. Kind of what I envisioned for this one, but I don't have multiple paintings going on yet. But what I would like to do is I would like to be able to have some videos that are almost like studio vlogs, but very art-centric, very focused on the pieces that I'm specifically working on, or the projects that I'm working on, and then I can show you the process as I'm working on all of the things that I'm working on. I ideally would want to have multiple pieces that are in the works at all times, whether they're oils or watercolors. And I want to have projects that I'm working on. I do have projects that I'm working on that I'm not able to show you guys. So if I were to if I were able to have videos where I can show you the process of my artistic process for everything, I would be able to show you a lot more stuff, and I would be able to work on a lot more stuff. And I just feel very excited thinking about that. It will not be every video, but I do think I really want to try this where I can show you guys the process of multiple pieces at once. And I do think that that'll help me stay engaged and excited and feeling creative if I can jump from one piece that I may feel bored or frustrated with, or yeah, if I just need a break from it, I can move to a different piece and then switch back and forth. Theoretically, I hope that that'll give me a lot more excitement for working on them and for staying working on things. And that is pretty much it for this week for the amount of progress I could get done. I am sure that next week I'll be able to get a lot more painting done on this one, since I won't have to spend more time working on the sketch. I can just get right to painting. But yeah, that's about it. I do want to give a huge thank you to all of my patrons over on Patreon. You guys are absolutely incredible. I cannot thank you enough for all of the support you show me. And I also have a link to my shop. There's a link down in the description that'll take you over there, where I have lots of art prints, originals, stickers, enamel pins, which I personally love. But yeah, that's down there. A link to my Patreon is also down there. But that's it for today. So I'll see you guys next time.